Good evening, everybody. I wanted to create an announcement that goes over the final project for History 245, and to do that I thought I would create a PowerPoint presentation for you guys, just to be able to present the information in a very condensed format. So, what is the final project for this course? The final project for this course involves the creation of a research paper on a topic in American history related to the subjects that we're covering in this course. So basically everything from the end of World War II up to really the end of the Cold War. And there are kind of three objectives that your paper will need to cover. The first one is that we want you to be able to demonstrate an advanced knowledge of the development of American society since World War II. The second aspect of your paper is that we want you to critically analyze ideas from both primary and secondary sources. So that should give you a clue that your paper needs to include both primary sources, which are original historical documents that date from the time period that you are studying, and secondary sources, which are scholarly books or journal articles that were written by historians after the fact about your topic. And finally, we want you to develop arguments based on those primary and secondary sources and be able to articulate those ideas in a clear manner in the written word. So this is an argumentative paper or essay. That means that you will need to develop a research question and you will need to answer that question with a clear, very concise thesis statement. And I'm going to go over all of this in just a minute. But you might be wondering, how do I begin? Well, the first thing that you need to do is to choose your topic. How do I go about choosing a topic, you might be asking? Well, your topic should be interesting to you. You can basically choose anything in American history from this period that we're studying in the course, anything from the end of World War II up to really the end of the Cold War, which means the 1980s and early 1990s. But your topic should be interesting to you. You want to be able to kind of be engaged with the topic. You don't want to find it boring because that will, sort of not bode well for you as you move through the course. So make sure you pick something that you are interested in. Your topic should also be credible and it should be focused on history. I would really rather not see any papers that have to do with conspiracy theories, things that aren't kind of, accepted knowledge about American history. And make sure that the topic you choose is not too recent. Historians typically like to leave about 30 some odd years after an event has occurred before they begin to study it, because that kind of distance, that temporal distance, allows for a certain amount of objectivity. So really, we don't want to see any events after the late 1980s, early 1990s, please. Even though our readings for this course is going to go up into the 2000s, we're not going to kind of get up into that in our research papers. And finally, your topic should allow you to find solid sources for your research. You guys do not have the luxury of spending months and months researching in archives. So you want to be able to find enough sources. You want to pick a topic that will allow you to find enough sources for your research. So once you've kind of decided, well, this is something that I'm interested in, this is something that's appropriate, that's an appropriate topic for this course, how do we go about narrowing your focus? So let's say that you are interested in writing about the civil rights movement, just as an example. That's a great start for a topic, but you can't just say, my topic is going to be the civil rights movement. That is way too big of a topic to cover in an 8 to 10 page paper. Hundreds and hundreds of 300, 400, 500 page books have been written about the civil rights movement, and you only have 8 weeks and you only have 8 to 10 pages. So there's no way you could possibly cover the entire civil rights movement in this short of a paper. So you're going to need to narrow your focus down. How do you narrow something down into something that's manageable in an 8 to 10 page paper? Well, there are a couple of ways you can do this. For example, you could decide to focus on a single event. and use that event as a case study to examine the broader topic as a whole. So, going back to our example of you want to write about the civil rights movement, you could say, well, I'm going to look at the Montgomery bus boycott, or I want to look at the Greensboro sit-ins or the Selma March, and use that event to kind of examine this broader topic. You could also decide to focus on a particular individual and the role that they played. So obviously the first individual that comes to mind when we think about the civil rights movement is Martin Luther King Jr. And Martin Luther King Jr., while he's a great subject of study, is way too big of a figure to, it would still be a way too big of a topic to focus on for this paper. His involvement was just too intense and too vast to really kind of effectively tackle it. But there are plenty of other lesser known figures within the civil rights movement who are just as interesting and contributed just as much, maybe even more than Martin Luther King did. So you can kind of focus on one of those individuals, or if you're interested in looking at kind of one of the main leaders of the movement, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, you could decide to focus on a particular aspect of their life. For example, if you're interested in Martin Luther King, you could decide, I'm going to look at Martin Luther King and his opposition to the Vietnam War. Or you could say, I want to look at Malcolm X and his kind of complicated relationship with the Nation of Islam. Though that would be a way to focus on that single individual while still maintaining that kind of narrow focus. Finally, another way that you can narrow your focus is to think about what historical lens you want to use. Historians typically tend to, when they are approaching a topic, they typically tend to look at it from a particular historical lens. And oftentimes this kind of historical lens is what kind of historian they are. So there are political historians. There are social historians, people who look at the way different groups interact in society. For example, people who look at historians who looked at gender relationships, or historians who look at race relationships. There are economic historians who focus on, kind of the way business operates in society and, looking at capitalism and that kind of thing. There are technological historians or scientific historians who look at how science and technology develops. There are religious historians who look at the role that religion plays in society. Cultural historians who look at popular culture and how that gets manifested. So there are all kinds of different historical lenses you could use. So if you wanted to write about the civil rights movement, you could think, well, I'm interested in looking at the role that gender played in the civil rights movement, or I'm interested in looking at the relationship between the civil rights movement and American foreign policy during this period. Or I want to look at how the boycotts of the civil rights movement affected the economy. That would be a really interesting way to narrow your focus down. So those are some ways that you can narrow down your focus. Once you've selected a topic and you've narrowed your focus down to something that's manageable, the next step is to develop a research question. And the way you develop a research question is the first thing you need to do is to get enough background information on your topic. Now, if you don't already have enough background information on your topic, you're going to need to do some preliminary research. And probably the best place to start for this preliminary research are encyclopedia articles. You have access to online encyclopedia articles through Shapiro Library, so this is a great place to start. But, and I will give a big flashing caveat to this, you cannot rely only on encyclopedia articles as sources for your research paper. I cannot emphasize this enough. If all you put as sources for your research paper are encyclopedia articles, you are not going to do very well. This needs to be a paper that goes beyond background information. You are not simply telling us what happened. You aren't simply giving us a report on these are the historical events that happened. You are making an argument here, and in order to do that, you will need to go into more depth that an encyclopedia article can bring you. So, With that being said, once you've done enough preliminary research and you have enough background information that you kind of have a good basic understanding of what's involved in your topic, then you want to make sure that the question you are asking is open-ended, that it cannot be answered with a simple yes or no or by listing a series of facts. For example, the question, did President Johnson's support help to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act? That's a good question, but you can pretty easily answer it and just say yes. You want to make something that's more than just a yes or no question. And kind of the sort of flip side of that is that historians typically like to move beyond simple questions of what happened, and they like to think about the how and the why. So if you look at your question and you look at the way it's worded, if you start out with the word what, or did this thing occur, you want to think, how can I turn that into a how or a why question? Start with how and why. That is the kind of best way to develop a really strong research question. And if you find yourself, once you've developed that research question, if you find yourself thinking about other questions, that's actually a really good thing. Your research question should be leading to other questions. This is a sign that you've developed a solid critical research question. So, now that you've come up with a research question and you have a topic, you have your background information, you've developed your research question, the next step is to start looking for evidence. And as I mentioned before, your evidence for this paper will come from both primary sources, which are historical documents that were written or created during or immediately after the event that you will be writing about, and secondary sources, what other scholars have written about this topic in books or scholarly journal articles. And the best place to find your evidence to start looking for this is Shapiro Library. There are a lot of resources offered by Shapiro Library. They even have reference librarians that you can contact, and they're available 24/7 to help you find information about topics. So really try to make use of the resources that you have available here. The best place to find secondary sources are article databases like JSTOR or America History and Life. This is a great place to find articles published in scholarly academic journals. And I'm directing you guys to look for articles rather than books because articles will be shorter, they'll be easier to digest, they contain often more up-to-date information and up-to-date scholarship. So you want to try to focus on looking for scholarly journal articles. Books are good too, but you don't have a lot of time, and so you don't want to get bogged down into reading, a massive book and trying to use that. So look for article databases like JSTOR, American History and Life. There are a bunch of others, Project Muse, other ones that you can use, and Shapiro Library has links to all of these, and you have access to all of these article databases through Shapiro Library. The best place to find primary sources are through online archives. And there are links to online archives at Shapiro Library. And I'm also going to, in my announcement that I post with this presentation, I'm going to provide links to a number of different online archives that contain primary sources that are specifically related to the Cold War and American society during this particular era. So you can use those links to find your primary sources as well. All right, so what are the assignments that are involved in creating this research paper? So there are 3 milestones that you guys will be completing. The first milestone is due in Module 3, and it's a 1-page proposal. And in this assignment, basically what you need to do is define what your topic is. You need to provide a little bit of background on your topic and explain how you are going to narrow it down. And you want to clearly indicate your research question and your preliminary thesis. That doesn't mean that you are necessarily locked into that research question or locked into that thesis with this proposal. It's just a proposal. And so if your thesis changes as you go into your evidence, that's absolutely okay. The second milestone is your rough draft and bibliography, and this is due in Module 5. Now note, Module 5 is week 5, and that's going to come up pretty quickly, so you want to get on working on this as soon as possible. Your bibliography should be an itemized list of all of your primary and secondary sources. And again, you aren't locked into the list that you provide, the bibliography that you provide here. If you find additional sources after that, or if you decide you're not going to use some of the sources that you listed in your bibliography, that's okay. It's just to give a sense of how you're doing on this project and that you're making progress on it. And finally, milestone 3 is the final paper, and this is due in Module 7. Your paper should be 8 to 10 pages. That doesn't include the cover page and the bibliography. And you will need to use a minimum of 6 sources in the paper, and at least 3 of those sources must be primary sources. So you want to make sure that you do not neglect that. If your paper only contains secondary sources, you are not going to do very well on the assignment. So make sure that you at least have 3 primary sources out of the 6 sources that you are required to have. All right, so you might be asking at this point, well, I've got lots of questions about this, where do I go? The best place to go, if you have questions, is to post them in the general questions forum. Chances are pretty good that if you have a question about something, there are probably 4 or 5 other people in the course who are asking the same thing. So please do your classmates a favor and post your questions in the general questions forum. I will answer them within 24 hours of you posting, so make sure that you post them there. If you aren't comfortable asking your question publicly, you can email it to me. But I would say the first place to go, if you don't have any problem asking the question in public, please just ask it in the general questions forum. This is the best place to ask your question. And if you have a question, you might want to check the general questions forum to make sure that sort of nobody else has already asked it, and the answer will be available to you there. If you want to run a potential topic or a research question or a thesis statement by me, I'm more than happy to provide advice and suggestions. And you can post those in the general questions forum, or you can email them to me. So that concludes the overview of the final project. And again, if you have questions, please do fire away.